Welcome back to By the Pages. Today, we're going to be looking at a book that's both kind of captivating and a little unsettling.
Yeah.
The Book of Judges.
It's a good one.
It's raw, it's honest, and it might just make you look at leadership and faith in a whole new light.
Absolutely. The Book of Judges, it's not, your typical feel-good story. It kind of plunges us right into this, turbulent period in Israel's history, right after they enter the Promised Land, under Joshua's leadership. And so we get to witness the rise and fall of these, really charismatic figures.
Right.
These judges who are, they're more almost like military heroes than, courtroom officials.
Yeah, and that's where it gets really interesting because the book doesn't shy away from showing us their flaws, like their struggles and the very human choices that they make that lead to some pretty dramatic consequences, like a cautionary tale in some ways, reminding us that even those who are chosen by God aren't immune to messing things up.
That's right. And the book lays out this repeating pattern, this cycle of disobedience. The Israelites, they turn away from God. They face oppression from their enemies. They cry out for help. And then God raises up a judge to deliver them. But, as soon as things settle down, they forget all their lessons and just kind of slip right back into the same old patterns. It's
almost as if they're caught in this loop, constantly testing the boundaries of their covenant with God.
Yeah.
But instead of judging them, see, the book really kind of invites us to examine this cycle, what does it reveal about human nature, about the challenges of staying faithful, and about the unwavering nature of God's grace, even when we make mistakes.
Exactly. Take the very beginning of the book, Judges chapters 1 and 2. God commands the Israelites, to drive out the Canaanites from the land, but they don't. They fail to do it completely. They start adopting the Canaanites' practices. They even start worshiping their gods.
Wow. It's so tragic and ironic. Here's Israel, chosen to be a holy people, set apart from the nations, and yet they end up mirroring the very people that they were meant to replace. It begs the question, is this simply a condemnation of their actions, or is this a realistic portrayal of the struggles of faith, even for those who have experienced God's miraculous power?
I think that's a really profound observation. And, this sets the stage for this kind of cyclical pattern that we see that dominates the book. Sin, oppression, repentance, deliverance. Each judge's story kind of fits into this framework. They sin, they face the consequences, they cry out to God, they experience deliverance, and then boom, the cycle begins all over again.
Wow.
Which raises an important question. Is there any true redemption in this cycle? Or are the Israelites just doomed to repeat all their mistakes?
It's a question that even resonates today. How often do we find ourselves in these similar cycles? Making choices that we know are wrong, facing those consequences, promising to do better, and then just falling right back into those old habits.
Yeah. We're going to explore that further as we delve into these individual stories of the judges, each with their own strengths, weaknesses, and remarkable moments where God uses them despite all their flaws.
Yeah.
I think these stories, they offer these valuable lessons on leadership, faith, and the persistent nature of human struggle.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah, so the Book of Judges, it introduces us to this whole cast of characters.
Right.
We see these valiant warriors like Othniel, Hud, and Deborah, and their victories are just thrilling and yes, often quite violent.
Right.
But, their stories, they highlight this incredible courage and strength that emerges, during these times of crisis.
It's the later judges, though.
Yeah.
Gideon, Jephthah, and Samson, where the book really digs into the human psyche. Their stories aren't just about battles and victories. They're about wrestling with doubt, making impulsive choices and facing the consequences of their flaws.
Yeah. Gideon, for instance, he's chosen to deliver Israel from the Midianites. But, even after witnessing God's power, he's still plagued by all this doubt and insecurity. Remember, his famous fleece test?
Oh.
He's asking God for, not one, but 2 signs. He needs this constant reassurance before he's willing to take any action.
Yeah, that's such a relatable struggle, though, isn't it? Even when we have, evidence of God's presence and his guidance, doubt can still creep in, whispering, what if I'm wrong? What if I've misunderstood?
Yeah.
Gideon's story just reminds us that even those who are chosen for really great things, they can still be crippled by fear and uncertainty.
Right. And then you have Jephthah. Yeah, he's a skilled warrior, but he makes this really rash vow.
Yeah.
Before going into battle, he promises God, if he's victorious, I'll sacrifice the first thing. That comes out of his house. And tragically, it's his own daughter who greets him upon his return.
It's a story that's debated often, isn't it? Some people see it as just an act of blind faith.
Yeah.
while others view it as this cautionary tale about the dangers of making these like impulsive vows and a lack of understanding about God's true nature.
It's such a complex story. Now, it forces us to confront these kind of uncomfortable questions about like the nature of sacrifice and the tension between human will and divine will.
Yeah. And of course, we can't forget Samson, arguably the most famous and enigmatic of all the judges. He's blessed with this like superhuman strength, but he's also consumed by passion and just driven by all these desires, which ultimately lead to his downfall.
Samson's story it's really a study in contrast, this incredible strength, but paired with this crippling weakness, this divine calling intertwined with human fallibility. It's this reminder that even those who seem larger than life they're still vulnerable to temptation, the consequences of their choices.
You know what's striking to me is that despite all their flaws, God's Spirit still empowers each of these judges. It's as if the book is saying, look, God doesn't wait for like these perfect vessels. He works with what he has. He uses these broken, flawed individuals to accomplish his purposes.
Oh, right. And that raises, I think, a really crucial question for us today. Like, are we limiting God by just focusing on our own inadequacies?
Yeah.
Do we hold back from serving? From stepping into our calling because we feel like we're not good enough or strong enough or wise enough.
Right.
The book of Judges, I think, challenges us to kind of embrace our imperfections, to trust in God's ability to work through us despite our flaws, and to step out in faith, even when we feel, uncertain or afraid.
That's so good. And as we kind of move into these final chapters of Judges, the tone shifts pretty dramatically. We've seen the flaws of the judges, but now we just see this like corruption spreading throughout the entire Israelite community. It's just this bleak picture of like moral decay, violence, and self-serving behavior.
Judges chapters 17 through 21, they paint this picture of a society that has just totally lost its moral compass.
Right.
You encounter stories like Micah, who creates his own idol and personal shrine. Then there's the tribe of Dan, who brutally conquer and just massacre the peaceful city of Laish.
Oh, wow.
And finally, you get to the horrifying events that lead to the first civil war in Israel.
It's like this downward spiral, isn't it? A consequence of this recurring phrase that just echoes throughout all these chapters. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. It just highlights the chaos that ensues. When individuals reject authority and like decide to become a law unto themselves.
The absence of a king, of like a centralized authority, leads to, anarchy. Everyone's doing what they think is right in their own eyes, regardless of what the consequences are for others.
Right.
And this serves as like a stark warning about the dangers of societal breakdown, when there's just no moral compass, no like guiding principle to unite people.
It's a theme that resonates even today. I mean, in a world just saturated with information, and all these diverse viewpoints, it's so easy to fall into the trap of like relativism, where everyone believes their own truth is absolute. We see it play out everywhere in like our social discourse, our political landscape, even like in our personal relationships.
Yeah, for sure. The book of Judges, it doesn't, offer easy answers or like simple solutions.
Right.
But it forces us to confront these uncomfortable truths about human nature and like the consequences of our choices. It reminds us that like true freedom isn't about doing whatever we please. It's about living within this framework of values that promote justice, compassion, and respect for others.
The book ends on such an unresolved note. The final sentence just states, Israel has no king.
Yeah.
It leaves us with this kind of sense of anticipation, doesn't it?
It does.
This longing for something more, a recognition that like this chaotic state can't continue. It sets the stage for like the books of Ruth and Samuel, where we see the emergence of King David and the establishment of a monarchy.
The book of Judges, despite, its harsh realities, I think it ultimately points towards hope. It reveals our human need for guidance, for something beyond ourselves, to like direct our paths. And it reminds us that even in the darkest of times, God is at work. He's preparing a way forward, offering this like glimmer of light amidst all the shadow.
So as we wrap up our exploration of Judges, we're left with this challenge. How do we apply these like ancient lessons to our modern lives in a world where, everyone does what is right in their own eyes? How do we find our moral compass? How do we resist, the pull of self-serving behavior and contribute to a society that values justice and compassion? These are questions worth pondering. And as always, we encourage you to, dive into the scriptures yourselves and discover the timeless wisdom that they hold. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to By the Pages for more fascinating journeys through the Bible.